Hello, beautiful people. If this video is cringy, I'm sorry. I'm not super comfortable in front of a camera of any sort, so this is a little bit uncomfortable for me, but I'm gonna do my best. So talking about disability this week, this was really new for me because I don't really have anybody in my life who is a disabled person, so this topic was definitely something that was a little bit uncomfortable because it made me realize a lot of things that I hadn't thought about before. The biggest one was Article 2. Sorry, I've got my notes here that I'm reading off of. But it was talking about how we make it seem as though disabled people need to be cured. And it was something that I had never really thought about before, but like is totally true. And there was a quote that really stuck out to me that was towards the end of the article. And it said, when cure functions as a type of social control or pressure to eradicate disability communities, it becomes the opposite of liberation, making people with disability feel trapped or inadequate. I feel like that was just something that really hit me, and I think it's really true. Because it's always like, even with like an illness, it's always like you have to cure your illness because there's something wrong with you. It's not normal. It's not, what's supposed to be right with your body. And I've never really thought about how that can make people who have incurable illnesses or, disabilities, make them feel like invalid and not enough. And I can't imagine how uncomfortable that is to like not feel good enough in your own body in that sort of way. So that was something that really stuck out to me. The terms article was really helpful, and I actually really enjoyed it because even when we were in class, Rachel had talked about, like not using ableist language, and I didn't really even kind of understood what ableist language meant. So it was really helpful to have kind of like a list of things to be like, this is what is appropriate and this is what is not appropriate to use. But in I think it was the last article, it was interesting because it also talked a little bit about like ableist language and like correct and proper terms to use. And it was interesting to me how they had talked about how you should use like people first language. So saying like, disabled people instead of saying the disabled, because you're putting the person back into that, that term. So you're making it about the person and not defining them based on their disability. Because of course, people are multifaceted, and just because, something is different about you doesn't mean it should label you and like yourself in total and who you are as a person. Because nobody, like, that comes into play with like the whole intersectionality stuff that we've been talking about. And it's like, you're not defined by just one thing. You're defined by many things, so therefore you shouldn't have to live under like a single label, if labels at all. But it was also interesting to me how they talked about how the people first language is actually controversial. So it made me wonder, like, how do you know when to use it? Because it talked about how a lot of disabled people communities preferred that, but then some didn't. At the same time, I think they talked about how the deaf community and the autistic community, they didn't prefer to use people first language because those people in those communities feel like their disability is a part of who they are, and they don't want to take that away from who they are. So it makes me wonder, like, how do you know when to use people first language? So I'm assuming that you would just ask, but it's also kind of like, that's a little bit strange to be like, how would you like me to refer to blah blah blah, or like change my speech pattern? So like, I'm curious as to like what would be the most beneficial and like non-awkward way to approach something like that, because that's not something I've ever had to do myself. Let's see what else here. Oh, I also liked how they noted that just because something's politically correct does not make it automatically inoffensive to a group of people, because I feel like that's true for a lot of things, and we see in politics nowadays, like people talk about like having to be politically correct or complaining about the fact that they have to be politically correct, but like after all of the stuff that we've learned in this class, I definitely have like come to the understanding that it's not about being politically correct when you're addressing someone who's someone who's a part of a community. It's more about asking them what is correct for them, because often, like, just how we've talked about, like, with disability and, you know, like, underserved communities, we often focus on what we want to give them and not necessarily what they need. um, so I think that was really awesome that they pointed that out, because it's a way for us to make sure that we're asking those people in those communities what they need from us, and not as automatically assuming what we need to give to them, because I think that ties into like stereotypes. Like when you have like a stereotypical idea about like a community or a person from a community, like you automatically think like, oh, this is what they need from me, or this is what I need to do for them, without necessarily like asking what they need from you. So I thought that was really important. And another thing about the last article is I didn't realize how capitalization played a role in like identification within communities. Like I guess they talked about the difference between like capital D deaf versus little d deaf, and I like had no idea that that was a thing. So I'd be interested to know like how that plays into communities other than just the deaf community, and like how that plays a role in like cultural and community identification. So like after kind of reading through all of these articles, it was a little bit, it wasn't much for me to take in, but it was kind of a lot to take in. So I went to YouTube and I looked at a few videos, because something that really struck out to me was, of course, like how I mentioned earlier, like the first article, and us as a society like constantly kind of imposing our thoughts and, you know, what we think is normal on people who are disabled. So then it kind of brought up something in me, because like, you know, we always talk about how like people who are disabled, they're like inspirational, and you always see videos like in the news or online or on YouTube and stuff like that, like celebrating people with disabilities and like, oh, saying you're an inspiration to me because it's like, you know, my life could be worse, so you're here to remind me that, you know, I should be grateful for what I have. And so I was just kind of thinking about that, and I found a TED Talk video, and the speaker, her name was Stella Young, and she was talking about how in society we often objectify disabled people as objects for inspiration and think of them as nothing else other than just like an inspiration for non-disabled people. So she just kind of went through a talk about how, you know, disabled people are not objects of inspiration. And she said something in her video that really stood out to me, and I wrote it down. And she said, in reference to people within the disabled community, she said, "We learn from each other's strength and endurance, not against our own bodies or diagnoses, but against a world that exceptionalizes and objectifies us." And I thought that was really powerful, because like she was talking about, we often kind of like, we see disabled people and we look to them and be like, you're so inspirational, like you're so amazing, just because you have to live with, you know, this thing that affects how your body functions, or, you know, stuff like that. And that was just, it was powerful to me to listen to her say that, because I think it's something that like even I'm guilty of. Like I'm so into makeup, and there's several accounts that I follow, and it's people who are disabled people, and like there's, I can't remember her name, but there's this one girl, she doesn't have arms, and she's able to do like full glam face of makeup with like, you know, like her arms without her hands, and it's just like the coolest thing to me. I'm like, that's amazing, she's so talented, it's so inspirational that like she goes out and she does that and she doesn't have hands. And now I'm after like I'm going through all of this stuff, I'm like, that was maybe not very correct. And it was, I keep saying it was interesting to me, but it was interesting to me because this is all like, this is new stuff for me. But in the TED Talk, Stella Young also talked about how like to live with disability doesn't make you exceptional. People, or disabled people, are just using their bodies in the way that they know how to the best of their ability, which is just what able-bodied people do. We use our bodies to the best of our ability in the way that we know how. And it kind of also tied in back to the second article, because I think the author at some point was talking about how like she didn't want a cure for, you know, her disability, and she loved her body and the body that she was in because it was the body that she knew and the body that she was comfortable with, because that's the body she'd lived with her entire life. So anything else would have been scary and uncomfortable and strange for her. So I think that, like, for me at least, I need to take steps to kind of get out of that mindset of thinking that people or disabled people like don't want to be disabled or don't want to live in the body that they want to live in, because I'm not saying that's always the case, because I'm only, I guess, talking about this based off of a few perspectives, and that's not representative of the disabled or people within the disabled community as a whole. But oh my gosh, I just lost my train of thought. What was I talking about? I just lost my train of thought. Hold on, give me 1 second. But just I need to take steps to like consciously remind myself of that, and to not automatically like feel bad for people, because, and I watched another TED Talk too, and it was a woman with cerebral palsy, and she was talking about how she was like, I hit all of the markers. She said, you know, I'm from, I think she said she was Arab, she's from the Middle East, she's Muslim, she's disabled, and she's a woman. But she was a comedian. She was absolutely hilarious. I really enjoyed her TED Talk, because she also talked about a lot of the same things. And she had talked about how she went to like a prestigious university, and she like was a part of the theater department, and she kind of went into talking about how, you know, disabled people are not represented in the media by disabled people. And I watched another video, and it was like unpacking ableism. And that was something that they had hit on too. And that wasn't something that I had thought about before, because we always talk about people or like members of the LGBTQIA community not being represented in the media by characters who, or by actors who are a part of the community. And that's something that I think we like focus on a lot, or something that we focused on a lot in this class. So then hearing about it in like a different context for a different underrepresented community was something new for me, and something that I hadn't thought about before. But like, she's totally right, because she had talked about how her senior year of high school there was a play, and the main character was a woman with cerebral palsy, and she was like, yes, this is my role, I was born to do this. And then she wasn't cast for it because they felt like she couldn't do the stunts. And so she had talked to the director about it, and she was saying, well, if I can't do the stunts, that means realistically somebody with cerebral palsy couldn't do the stunts. So like, I thought that was funny. I'll try to link the videos below if you guys are interested in watching, because they were actually like super helpful and really enjoyable, and I enjoyed them. So yeah, I did a little bit of my own research, but I enjoyed doing that and watching some of those videos, not only because they were entertaining, but they were also very eye-opening, and I think they tied a lot into what the articles had also talked about for the pre-lecture assignment. And I think after reading all of these things, it's kind of added to my social consciousness a little bit, and I really want to make a better effort to like be more aware of those things. And because I always talk about like panning is something that I've really gotten out of this class. So I think like we had talked about panning, and like recognizing like where, or like if places were accessible, like wheelchair accessible and stuff like that, like, you know, when you're noticing your surroundings. So I think that's something that's going to stand out to me a little bit more now that I've like read some of this stuff, and also watched videos excuse me, let me start over. I don't have words today, but it's Monday, so it's okay. But after listening to disabled people talk about some of those things in their videos, and how like it goes beyond the scope of like physical accessibility, but also like accessibility and visibility and like media and stuff like that. I feel like that's something I'm going to try to be more conscious about in kind of like my day-to-day life. So yeah, I'm sorry this ran a little bit long, and like I said, I'm sorry if it was cringy. I'm trying really hard to keep eye contact with the camera. So hopefully I'll rewatch it and it won't be too bad. But anyways, okay, thanks for listening. Bye.